Well, good afternoon. We'd like to welcome you to the Nations of Coaches Legacy Series. We spoke last week in part one of our Legacy Series this year. We talked about, we would be in year 7, our 7th annual Legacy Summit that we hold each year down in Atlanta, Georgia at Chick-fil-A headquarters. And due to the many changes that we're all under right now, we've decided to turn this year's summit into a Legacy Series. We've invited some influential leaders that strive to leave a legacy of excellence in their circles of influence. We were thrilled to have Coach Rick Barnes from Tennessee last week with us. Gave us some great insight into his program, his personal life, his faith walk, and how he leads those players and those people around him. It was really a special time. Week number 2, we're really excited as we introduce and bring into the series Mr. Clark Kellogg. He doesn't need much introduction. But before I do that, let me just give you 2 quick instructions if you're coming on the call. As a coach, we're thrilled, we're honored that you're with us here today. Couple things. Utilize the Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen. You guys are well versed in Zoom calls, I'm sure of that, given the last couple months. But with the Q&A, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear questions that we can throw at Clark and let him bring his unique perspective to that question. So as we go, start filling that Q&A box full of things you'd like to hear. We'll try to get to as many as we can. The chat feature, again, you're all familiar with that as well. We would love to connect with you. So leave your name, a number, contact information, whatever that might be. If there's a way that we can serve you at Nations of Coaches, we want to be able to do that. So we'll do our best to follow up with things we get on the chat. I'll remind you a little bit later as well, but just keep those 2 things in mind as we talk a little bit here today. So our guest today in week number 2 of the Legacy Series, former player, great player at The Ohio State University, former NBA player. He's wearing the colors for us today. That's a good sign right there. He's known in many, many circles as an outstanding college basketball analyst for CBS. He's a voice of analysis and perspective that we all missed greatly this past March. I know that. But everybody give me a big Zoom silent round of applause for Mr. Clark Kellogg. Welcome, Clark.
Hey, thank you, Ted. Glad to be with you and the coaches and others that have decided to join us. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, like I said before, last week we had a great conversation with Coach Rick Barnes. We've got a couple more weeks after this of some guests that we're excited to roll out, but it's just been a great moment to be able to share with the coaches, not only on the call, but later on as as we're streaming live on YouTube, people all over the world are able to see this moment. So we're excited to have you. Tell me this though. We've got a lot of things going on, a lot of chaos in our country and our world right now. There's a lot going on, and we're going to get to some of that here in a little bit later, especially things around racial tension and things like that in the country. But aside from that, what does the last couple of months look like for you? What's been the daily, the weekly rhythms of Clark Kellogg during this pandemic season?
Well, Ted, it's interesting because when things really cascaded to shutting down sports and businesses and the economy and people's lives in terms of sheltering at home, sheltering in place in mid-March, early March, I think the official beginning of that in most places was right around March, that week of March, 10th through the 17th, 18th, 19th, around there. I think there were some states that might have shut down a tad earlier, but that was right around the time of Selection Sunday weekend. And so there were conference calls that CBS and Turner colleagues and I had around the tournament and the possibility of what it would look like. And early that week, we were still planning on doing it. And then ultimately we had the positive test of Rudy Gobert of the Utah Jazz, which was a tipping point in terms of sports really escalating in their cut down. And then ultimately we knew as conference tournaments went by the wayside and ultimately the NCAA tournament. So that was difficult. to navigate that because it's been such a part of my life, the people, the excitement, the festival of basketball, all that entails. Um, Really hit me hard Selection Sunday because I was here and would have been in New York in normal circumstances with my teammates and colleagues and people so excited to cover the tournament. So I was in mourning, particularly that day. And then even in the days after, as I thought about on occasion the tournament and how we'd still be on that road to the Final Four the last few weeks of March into the first week of April. But then once we got beyond that first week of April, when things would be over anyway, I kind of went to my normal off-season routine. And I actually kind of started that 4 weeks early because of the pandemic. Recalibrating, resting, reading, reflecting. There's a bit of a disorientation, though, with something so new as what we've all experienced in terms of disruption. So there was some disorientation in addition to the morning the first couple of weeks, but I tried to occupy my days with a rhythm of being quiet, reading, journaling, and then catching up on some things that I might not otherwise have a chance to do, cleaning out some office drawers, doing some household chores. My wife and I embraced the hobby of jigsaw puzzles. We've done probably a dozen or so 1,000-piece puzzles over the last few months as a way for us to do something together and occupy your mind and your time in kind of a fun fashion. So, and then staying healthy, trying to stay healthy in terms of working out, having a regular workout routine, 4 to 5 days a week, making sure I'm doing something to get my heart rate beating faster than normal. And so, yeah, those have been kind of the ways I've attempted to navigate the days.
That's really good. I'm taking notes over here because I'm sitting here going, man, I haven't done any of those things. And I got to get
Well,
going here. I got to get.
You've probably done some things that I haven't done.
Oh man. Well, like a lot of guys, my yard looks really good right now. It's looking really pristine.
Yeah, I've been out there too, man. I love the serenity of being out amongst some mulch, picking some weeds, and thinking about the growth and the weeds and how sometimes they can be interlocked together. And I think about that a lot in terms of scriptures reference to how the wheat and chaff can be together, and it's going to take they'll be separated, and it takes a little work. But I enjoy getting out there with my wife to help make the yard look a little better.
No, that's good. I'm the same way. I'm a Midwest guy. I grew up in South Dakota of all places.
Oh, wow. Nice.
I'm telling you, man, I'm a parable of the soils guy. I'm
Yeah,
out there. So I'm digging in the dirt. I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
Stuff. But no, that's really good. Just it's fun. I know for us to be able to reach in for a moment, to a guy like yourself. You're not, in fact, you're not removed at all from what these coaches are going through. I mean, you're not a coach right now, but you're Clark Kellogg. You're a basketball analyst. You're around the game constantly. And so for us to get a glimpse, I think all coaches are a little bit curious, what's my buddy doing? What's another guy doing, during this time? And that's really great to hear that. The follow-up to that, the question I have would be is, as we all look forward to this time, when the pandemic ends or we get on the other side of it, so to speak, what do you hope is going to be different with you personally and maybe some others around you?
Man, that's a question I've thought about quite a bit. As a matter of fact, I've kind of stated it from the standpoint, I don't want to be the same coming out of this as I was going into it. And for me, a couple of things have kind of risen to the priority list or the top of it for me, to be more intentional about relationships in regards to, if I think about somebody, I reach out to them to call them, probably more than text them here during this pandemic. I've had some really rich conversations by taking that initiative, and I've really enjoyed when others have done that with me. And it's something I want to make a habit, is to pick up the phone and call folks and let them know I'm thinking about them, or just to chat and find out what's going on with them, to do that more intentionally and regularly. I hope I would be different in terms of generosity of time, talent, and resources with other people. We've been pretty much that way anyway, my wife and I. But I want to be more intentional about that. Then I want to be more committed to relationships with people that are different than me, whether that difference is racial, upbringing, experience. But I want to enjoy the opportunity to know a wide variety of people. And sports has certainly given me that opportunity, but I want to be more intentional about that as a couple, my wife and I, and more intentional even on a personal level. And then the other thing is I really want to be invested in trying to help younger people with what they need, the millennial Gen X generation, to be not necessarily wringing my hands about what they aren't, but being committed to walking alongside them with what they need from those of us who are a little older, and how we can benefit from their energy and their exuberance and their youth and their skill, and pour some of ourselves into them, so that multi-generationally we're growing and we're enhancing one another. And I try to do that, but I want to just be, again, I just want to amplify my intentionality around a couple of those areas. And the bulk of it, Ted, is relationships. Is really being intentional, obviously with the Lord, and then with my family, clearly with our adult kids and our 3 grandchildren, but to expand that circle to just a little wider.
That's really good. I would comment on that too, with this time, the last few months, a lot of us coaches, guys are going to relate to this. We've been on a lot of Zoom calls. We've done things differently. We've connected with our players differently and that type of thing. But I have found, you talk about, going through March Madness and the Final Four time, at Nations of Coaches, we've always had a presence at the Final Four, and we go as a staff and we connect, and it's a great opportunity, to find and connect and grow those relationships with coaches all over the country. But as you know, I mean, your time at the Final Four is a little bit different than most, but as coaches, we go and there's a lot of quick surface, quick catch up. How you doing? Hey, coach, because I don't quite remember your name, that kind of thing. But I'll say this personally, Zoom calls over the last couple months have given me an opportunity to watch a screen full of coaches from coast to coast. And the best thing about Zoom for me, I'm not that smart, but they got their name on their little profile, their picture there. And so I'm staring at a guy for 30, 40 minutes and we're talking. And like you said, that word intentionality, there's been deeper, just the quality of the conversations have been so much better because we've had to rely on the technology in front of us. It's been really neat to kind of connect. I think personally, I've gotten to know more coaches the last couple of months because of this. So if we had to look back and say, there's some positives, and you spoke about a list of positive things so far, personally as well as professionally. That's really been a key thing here the last couple of months for me.
Yeah, my hope is that's the case for everybody, that all of us would have those kinds of stories and experiences and changes that we're undergoing that are going to enhance our journey and help us be better for those that we have a chance to influence. I mean, that would be my prayer overall and universal, but it starts with, personal change, our ability to yield to personal change, to see some of our blind spots, to take advantage of a pause in our normal routine, to see where we might have some areas that need attention, and then do the work to begin to have those areas and habits change so that we can be better equipped to answer the call that we have in whatever realm that is, and I'm confident that'll be the case for a lot of folks. The hardship and the pain and the disruption and the challenge is real, and I don't want to dismiss or ignore that. And that's part of relationship too, being able to enter into with other people what they're going through, and to be able to offer some support and encouragement from your own journey. So yeah, it's really it's impacted me significantly in that regard as I read and as I think. Those are areas that have lasting impact, and I want to be right in the middle of that going forward.
That's good. You know, shifting gears just a little bit, I'm just, before I do that, remind the coaches, please utilize the Q&A feature. List any questions you'd love to reach out to Clark with, and we'll try to fit those in here as we get toward the end of our time together today. And then at the chat, like I mentioned before, if you'd fill out any information, we want to connect with you at Nations of Coaches through the chat. So leave a name, an email, a number. And if there's any way we specifically can serve you, we'd love to do that. So shifting gears just a little bit, you know, maybe this is a personal, you know, I'm just curious with the role that you play as a college basketball analyst. You obviously get to travel around the country at a lot of different venues and looking at a lot of different programs, talk to a lot of different coaches. Along that path, certainly you're seeing a lot of different leadership styles, coaching styles, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, it's pretty vast, I would think. With that perspective, what are some common characteristics that you're seeing out there that sort of separate the programs, the ones that are very successful from the ones that are not?
Wow. I mean, that's one of the blessings and privileges of doing what I do. I do get to see a lot of different coaches and programs up close and personal. I would say a couple of things. One, there's a pretty consistent clarity around what the values are in an organization or in a program. The identity is pretty laid out in terms of how we're going to do our work. And that's reinforced in multiple ways. It's verbally, it's by example, it's with placards and signs, but there's a consistent message. A guy I used to work for with the Indiana Pacers, Kevin Pritchard, talked about talking in stereo. And usually the programs that are consistently excellent are talking in stereo. They have a clear understanding of who they are, what they're about, and how they're going to do their work. So that's one thing. And there are different leadership styles. I would say that there are different styles. There's, you know, the very intense type A personality. There's the teacher, professorial, quiet, storm type of personality. But there's always in all of the good leaders, there's a level of humility, but there's also a level of embracing the responsibility that they have as coaches, but also how they hold their team and staff accountable to their standards. And that's clearly communicated. So the other one would be clear communication. There's not any gray area, and if it exists, it gets cleared up quickly. But clear communication. And then the other thing, and humility is part of that, recognizing the responsibility you have, but also holding yourself and others accountable and allowing others to hold you accountable. I think that's something that's universal. And then the other thing I would say, Ted, is there's enthusiasm and passion for what they're doing, what they get to do. And from that, I think comes a level of trust, because coaches that display that and model that are showing their players and staff that they care. And so those are things that kind of jump out to me as pretty consistent when you're looking at, you know, really good, effective leaders.
Yeah, and I probably should have clarified my question a little bit in that I'm sure you can see, and we're not calling names out or calling programs out, but I think you probably have been around enough to know when you walk in and you see a program that's successful or good by the world standards versus a program that's, transformational. There's a difference there, I think. And I know we talk that language a lot at Nations of Coaches, but you probably know when you walk into a place, or you've been around these guys quite a bit, that there's a difference between winning tons of games and transforming lives.
Yeah, agree. And you make a really good point in that sometimes in my role, I get the helicopter in for a day and a half and get one glimpse. But a lot of the programs that we cover and a lot of the teams that I've been able to get to practice and watch, I've seen multiple times and have been able to interact with the coaches. So how they go about their work. And there is you can sense a difference. And I think in most cases, I can't even discern when there have been coaches. It's a small number. Most coaches have really, to me, been about not just winning games, but developing their young men and their teams. And that to me speaks to the essence of leadership is how are you helping somebody become the best they can be while they're under your influence? How do you bring out the best in them and help them be part of a bigger picture in terms of the team, but also in their individual growth and development. And most of the coaches that I've had the privilege of being around and interacting with are about that.
That's good. I had a question here that actually came from a coach, but I had it down on my list as well. And we talked about this a few days ago when we were prepping for this opportunity. And, you mentioned during this time, you've done a lot of reading and those kind of things, but what are some books that, whether you've read them recently or in the past, that have been instrumental for you, kind of built a framework of leadership or been really influential for you? Any books you're reading?
Yeah, there are a number. Yeah, actually, I've read everything that Tony Dungy has written except his most recent one. He's just got a great perspective and a rich reservoir of experience as a coach and as a leader and as a Christian father, husband. He hits a lot of the boxes that I've scratched other than coaching. So I've always enjoyed his mentor leadership, Uncommon, The Uncommon Man. Those are two of my favorites. But I'm actually rereading one currently that I read a little while ago, and I'm actually going to hold it up here. It's called The Road to Character, and it's written by David Brooks, a renowned New York Times columnist. And it's a fascinating read because it's stories of 10 folks. I think it's 10 people that have impacted their time because of their embracing of eulogy virtues. In other words, not resume virtues, achievement, status, but dignity, courage, wisdom, humility, surrender, sacrifice, the virtues that I would like to have held up when the Lord calls me home as being who I was. The accomplishments, certainly I want to do well in what I'm doing, whatever that happens to be, but I would like to have the eulogy virtues speak louder than the resume virtues when my time is done. And David Brooks looks at a diverse group of people, men, women, black, white, from various periods in time that actually took steps in the eulogy virtue areas and impacted their time and their world for good. And it's timely because I'm going back and reading through it because A. Philip Randolph is one of the characters chronicled, the great civil rights activist in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and just refreshing my recollection of his journey and how he brought influence to areas of racial inequality and racism and injustice. But anyway, it's a really good read, and it's in storybook form. You're actually getting mini biographies of some of these folks. And then another book I would suggest, I just finished it during this time, Play the Man by Mark Batterson. Really good author and preacher and teacher. Play the Man, looking at the attributes of being a man of influence.
Really good. I love that term, that the eulogy virtues.
Yeah, it's powerful, isn't it? It speaks,
And like
man.
you
It
said,
really,
timely. Yeah,
it
without a doubt.
speaks. Yeah.
Without a doubt. Personal story here. Um, a couple months ago, I lost my father unexpectedly.
Oh, my condolences, man.
Oh,
Sorry to
thank
hear
you. I
that.
appreciate that. And not virus related and those kind of things, but it was a sudden heart attack. And what's been neat was we haven't looked back on his life and talked about the money he made or the business accomplishments or those kind of things, but it's the people that write the comments, that make the phone calls, that send the text, that say, he did this for me. He did that for me. Things we didn't know about. It's those eulogy. I mean, coming to life for real, but it's those virtues. Go, wow, I knew that about him. I didn't know that about him. And that's
no, that's a heck of a discovery, isn't it?
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. That's really good. Obviously I can't possibly have a conversation with you without talking about the events, the recent events in our culture, our country, the world, what's going on around us as we look really in every major city, even every small town in America right now. We've got unrest, racial discord. We've got issues right now that have always been there.
Yeah.
Right now, they're right in front of our face.
Yeah, for sure.
I would love to, I know we spoke a few days ago about, one of the things on your heart, whether it's coming out of pandemic time or walking through the culture that we're living in today in the world of college basketball, just in the world in general, is how we can be a part of building unity. That's something that's on your heart.
Yeah.
But how do we start to walk that out?
I think it starts individually. Clearly, this racism undercurrent has existed for hundreds of years, really, and decades in our lifetime in various forms and fashions, and has led to inequalities and injustices that are documented and real, suffering and pain and heartache along the way. And it's just been turned up in terms of the temperature because of what we've seen with law enforcement and unarmed Black men dying at the hands of excessive force. The pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, I think, too, has really laid bare some of the inequalities and injustices that are born of the tree of racism, of the root of racism. Healthcare access, disproportionate number of Blacks and folks of color being on the front lines in terms of the types of jobs that are deemed essential, and any number of other injustices and inequalities that exist can hunt back to racism on many levels, especially for Black people. That being said, there's a humanity that we all share, and that's where we have to land in order to have a chance at oneness. We don't dismiss or discount or ignore our differences, racial, ethnic, and otherwise, socioeconomic. But the reality is there's some injustices that have been systemic that have to be changed. And that's work for all of us. We all have work to do in that and more work to do for that. And it starts on a personal level. I mean, it starts on a personal level of being willing to listen and empathize with folks that are different, to learn, to understand, so you can begin to walk in someone else's shoes, and then to still see the humanity in our differences, to see the common ground in our differences. And some of that is born of real relationship, real interaction, as opposed to bubble living and distance contact with folks that are different than us. Sports is an unbelievable playground or landscape for that, because oftentimes sports brings people of various backgrounds together for the love of a game and then the desire to excel in that game. and to work towards a common good, even though you have individual differences. There's that building of team and unity that takes place so often in sports. And so it's really a call to us individually to think about where we might have implicit bias, where we can do and be better. And we walk that out. I walk it out by allowing the Word of God to filter my heart, my mind, and my eyes. And that's a work in progress, but the living, active Word of God is my guide. So the Bible talks about loving God and loving others as the two essential commandments for us to adhere to. The prophet Micah writes that we're to do justice or act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God, to give a level of dignity to everybody. And to do that because that's how God views us. And that's how he desires for us to act and live. That doesn't mean that we it basically means that we get engaged in living and promoting and enhancing justice through love for people. And that's where my heartbeat is. And unity comes about from that prism and that foundation. But it's work. It's real work to peel back some of the gunk that gets into our hearts and minds as a result of sin, as a result of upbringing and environment. We've got to continue to push to the higher ground and work for bringing everybody along in that manner to eliminate racism and injustice and inequalities, and to remember the poor, as the scriptures say, to remember the poor and all of the dimensions of what it means to be poor. And so I want to be part of the, I want to be engaged in being part of the solution and part of making a constructive difference, being part of constructive change in these areas that have been a stain and stench on our culture and country, and being brought to light in dramatic ways because of the convergence of some really challenging things to see and experience, the pandemic and some of the visuals we've seen around Black men dying at the hands of police officers.
Yeah. I mean, it really is tragic. You know, the things you brought up this word a lot, and just a second ago when you said work, you know, it's hard work,
Yeah.
but it's that word you mentioned before, and you've said from time to time, that intentionality.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I can get up and make statements all day. I can get up and talk about it, but the intentionality, if I am to wake up every morning and excuse me, to promote love for people,
Yeah.
that takes intentionality. There's no question about that. That's
a friend of mine just told me. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you
Well,
off.
just in the grand scheme of leadership in general, man, if I'm not waking up and intentional about what I'm doing that day or that week or what my vision is for leading people around me, where am I leading them?
Yeah.
You know, if I'm not intentional, if I'm not focused.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
please,
and it's interesting when you mention that, because one of the eulogy virtues that's talked about in one of the chapters in the Road to Character is self-mastery, and how that's one of the greatest, if not the greatest challenge we face, is mastering self, so that we can move to that high ground of loving people, because self often gets in the way of being able to do that, and that's a constant work in progress. I had a friend of mine tell me today on an earlier call that it's not just about responding, it's about the responsibility we have to take to do something. A response is necessary, and we have to give thought to how we respond to things that are going on in our world, in our homes, in our communities. We have to be measured and thoughtful, and sometimes biting and cutting with our response at the right time and in the right way. But we also have to be ready to take responsibility for mastering ourselves, for dealing with the areas of weakness that we have, with any particular issues of prejudice we might harbor. We all carry around implicit bias in us. And I've found in my work with the Ohio State Board of Trustees and serving on different committees at the university around hiring people to value implicit bias training, to embrace that. That's a way to develop and learn and grow, so we can see some of those areas that we need to change, and to get tools to be able to make those changes for ourselves, so we can impart that to other people. So it's real work, man, and it's lifelong work for all of us, and we have to decide how we're going to take that responsibility and challenge on as leaders, because we're all in positions of leadership in some form or fashion. And we have to be ready to handle that privilege and responsibility the right way.
No question. And the world needs strong leaders now more than ever.
Yeah.
A timely question from a coach, and because if I would look at the makeup of the coaches that registered for this webinar, we have several on the call right now.
Mm-hmm.
I have not, but we're going to have a strong mix of coaches of all different races. People who see this now either live or later on YouTube, or be a male, female, all kinds of different races. But one key question is, that helps us, I think it'll help anybody watching, would be, as a father, how do you personally help your sons and daughters understand racism?
Yeah.
And simple, what would be termed as simple, nothing's really simple here, but simple racist acts, kind of like getting pulled over for traffic stops, gas stations, etc. Driving, I've got a dear friend, one of my best friends in the world, okay, African-American head coach, college coach. And we share a lot, we talk constantly, but what I didn't know until just a few days ago is that in the past few months, living in primarily a white, community and area, that he's been pulled over 3 or 4 times, never speeding. And so I just asked one of the tough questions that, how are you talking to your children, your family about those kind of things? What's that?
Yeah, it's really, and actually, you think about it, I think most African Americans in a predominantly majority white world can share an experience where the color of their skin led to some type of slight or some type of harassment in some form or fashion, whether it was a word, an action, or what have you. I think that's the reality of how pervasive racism is and has been for decades, centuries even. So that's real. But I also start from the premise, Ted, that most people inherently are good. Okay, and I don't ever want to paint one group of people, black, white, brown, yellow, whatever happens to be the color, with one brush. I never want to paint a group of people with one brush. I want to look at folks individually, which goes back to my point, relationship. So I've talked to our children. Our daughter is married, 33, with a little girl, and then our boys are almost 31 and almost 29. So I've always started there, that inherently folks are good, but there is this element of racism that exists. And there are some people that are going to just not care for you because you're black. They're not going to receive you the same way because you're black. You take the high road there, but recognize it's real. And you treat people with respect and dignity, no matter what they look like, no matter where they're from, and quite honestly, no matter how they treat you. You control how you treat other folks. But understand that you have to be mindful of the darkness and evil in the world that is racism and is part of sin in a fallen world. Sinful people do sinful things. And so that's the reality. And that's how I've tried to approach it. And our kids are older. We had a really rich conversation just this weekend as all of this was kind of bubbling up, because everybody was here, all 3 kids and our grandkids, and we talked. And it was interesting to hear their perspectives, their anger, their frustration. And yet we didn't allow that to keep us from looking at how we can be what God calls us to be in the midst of this. What will that look like for each of us going forward?
I like that. And, what I hear in that too is not only some things that help me. I can't fully understand that, but it helps me to empathize and things like that. But also speaking to the legacy series, I see, and it's refreshing to see you leaving that legacy with your kids and your family, and the kind of, the communication, the paradigm, so to speak, coming from the father of your family. That's really important. That's going to speak. That's going to speak for generations.
I trust that it will, and I pray that it will. And I'm going to be intentional about trying to speak life and truth into our adult children, and now our 3 grandchildren, 2 little girls and a little boy. So that'll be constantly uppermost in my mind. How am I living? How am I leading? How am I loving? And how am I handling my missteps and my mistakes? And how am I growing? How am I stepping into tough area for the sake of growing and for the sake of representing, reflecting the image of God who loves me and gives me life and breath through his son, Jesus Christ? How am I walking that out and becoming more like him?
Yeah. Really great. I want to ask one more question, I think, on this. I think it, again, it's one of those tough questions, but it's on the minds, I know, of a lot of coaches out there, especially, again, here we go, but the white coach out there. What does he do right now? And I know a lot of friends in the coaching world right now that are, connecting with their players, their staff, doing the best they can, but former player, at many different levels, but also you have immersed yourself into the world of college basketball. How does that white coach today, one, relate to or speak to? How do they support their African-American players right now at this time, or assistant coaches on their staff, or whatever that might be?
I don't necessarily think it's complicated. It starts from a place of caring and sharing in terms of experience and a listening ear, but caring and sharing goes a long way. Caring enough to share your story, caring enough to hear the story of those you're leading, caring enough to step into their world, whether it be music on occasion or neighborhood or what have you. But caring and sharing is really the essence of relationship. Caring enough to ask hard questions, to talk about difficult subjects. And obviously this climate that we're in lends itself to conversations that should happen, maybe haven't, but this is an opportunity to allow them to happen, to make sure that they happen, and to grow and learn from it, and to let players know that you support them. And you may not know exactly what they feel, not being Black, but I feel your pain, and I want to share in that burden with you. But I think if you summed it up in just 2 words, it would be caring and sharing. And then you extrapolate what that looks like out to the very practical ways that you care and share. And that's really what it requires, because when folks know that you care and that you're willing to share their experience and yours with each other, then you begin to develop relationship, and you begin to see all of the common ground that you do share, despite whatever differences you might have. Because love has a way of deflating or minimizing the differences and elevating and enhancing and amplifying the common ground.
That's gold right there. I think I literally could go on all day, and we've tried to cover a lot of ground in this time we've had together, but we're starting to get to the point where we'll begin to close it up. But so coaches, if you've got question and answer kind of things that you want to throw at Clark, throw them out there. But I don't want to close or start to close until we start to talk a little bit more about at Nations of Coaches, we talk a lot about, the vision of what we try to do to serve, connect, and equip coaches around the country all goes back to James Naismith and the founder, the inventor of basketball and his purpose, for the game. And I know you've been involved in not only researching, this game, if you talk to any one of us coaches, we do this and we're involved in basketball because we love the sport.
Yeah.
We love it. Fell in love with it probably at an early age.
Yeah.
Those of us that couldn't play anymore stayed in it because you couldn't get enough. But there's something about the game, the beauty of the game that's kept us connected. But I personally think it's more than that. But can you speak to the purpose of the game of basketball and what Naismith had in mind when he invented this game?
Man, it's fascinating you bring that up because the love affair with the game is something that resonates on a deep level, I think, with all of us. ESPN did a 30 for 30 series, Love and Basketball, that was absolutely riveting and phenomenal, looking at the various aspects and the way that everybody has some kind of love affair with this game. And when you think about it from that standpoint, it is a labor of love. It's an avocation of love. It happens to be occupation for some of us, but man, that love component. And then as I've learned and read and done some homework on Dr. Naismith's intentions around using the game as a way not just to exercise the heart physically, but to change the heart spiritually in pointing those that were coaches to the master coach and those that would play the game to the master coach, speaking of God through Christ. And man, that is powerful as you think about the purpose of the game. It's a great game. It's a game we all love, but there was more to it than 10 guys and gals and a couple of baskets and a ball. That's the essence of it between the lines. But at the foundational core is this desire to have hearts changed, to point folks to the master coach, to honor and glorify him through leading others in the game. So man, that even enhanced my love affair, even though I can't do anything, but actually I can't even dream about dunking or shooting anymore. I used to be able to dream about it, and it felt real. I can't even dream about that basket. Looks like it's 14 feet high right now. But
I was never a fraction of the player you were, man. But I still think I could shoot a little bit.
I can still shoot as long as I don't have to move. As long as I don't have to move, and there's no defense, I can still shoot.
Me too.
Yeah.
My heart rate can stay right at 120. I can go all day. but I've got a 13-year-old at home that's starting to beat me here and there. So
you better stiff arm him quick, Ted. They got me. My boys got me when they were about 15 is when they got me, and I backed up out of there after that. Yeah.
Yeah. Time to retire. I get you. I appreciate your comments on James Naismith and the purpose. And like I said, that drives the vision of what we do at Nations of Coaches. It's that idea that, oh man, the game and coaches in particular, regardless of the sport really, but we like to brag on basketball that it's got a special meaning, and I live in the South, Nashville, SEC country, and football, all my neighbors.
Oh, I know.
I say, hey, that's great, and I'm a football fan, but basketball has a unique calling on it. It really does. Yeah. And Naismith said that when he prayed and wrote it in his journal, God, give me a game. Yeah. And we try to live that out every day here at NC. Absolutely. As we start to close, we just got a couple minutes left. I might hit you with a couple more questions from coaches, and we appreciate your input, coaches. And out of left field, what are your thoughts on the transfer portal? I mean, that's talk about controversial, nothing like what we've been talking about, but transfer portal. How can coaches, build a culture that might keep players around? I mean, these are always the thoughts of coaches right now.
No, I feel them too, man. And I don't like it. I like the players having the option to move if things aren't working. But my fear is that kids are leaving just because it's not what they thought, or it's not easy, or it's not what their parents wanted to be for them. And those factors can stunt growth, in my opinion. Now, I understand there are certain circumstances where it makes sense for both parties, but the vast majority, with the large number, some of it is part and parcel of the day and age we live in. We can't ever dismiss or separate ourselves from the culture. I mean, you think about instant gratification, social media, all of the noise that can influence kids that are 18, 19, 20, really impressionable. They look around and maybe aren't anchored to what reality is as far as their situation and their path. And it's hard at 18, 19 to realize that. I know I don't know how I would have fared in this day and age with the bombardment of noise and parents that tend to sometimes be overly involved in trying to navigate their kids' way in sports. I mean, there's so many layers to it, but I don't like it. I feel for the coaches because I think it's disruptive to development first and foremost. I think it's disruptive to and negative to individual development, because some adversity is warranted in order to grow and to get better. And when you just decide to shift gears or change places in hopes of avoiding adversity, I think can be really detrimental. And I fear, and I could be wrong, but I fear a vast majority of it, just from my experiences, that's why kids are moving as much as they are. They just, and some of that might fall on coaches if they weren't quite forthcoming and honest about circumstances and over recruited. I know it's a two-edged sword, but I like the idea of giving kids the option to move, but I don't like the way it's playing out. I just don't like the way it's played out because of what the reasons I've given.
Yeah,
it is there. Yeah. And I don't know exactly what the answer is for coaches, quite honestly. It really seems to impact mid-major programs significantly as kids that are maybe under-recruited or underlooked or overlooked coming out of high school develop, and then all of a sudden they want a part of a bigger. And I understand that. I clearly understand that, but I don't necessarily like it.
Yeah, it's almost, you can laugh a little bit, chuckle. I can, because I'm not in it right now.
Yeah.
I'm trying to serve these coaches, so it's not really necessarily a laughing matter, but
Right.
You're right. Some of those low, mid-major schools, those coaches are developing them so well.
Yeah.
And players gain that confidence and then graduate early. It's that darn summer school to get those credits done early and move on. But it's really good. How about another quick one? What are your thoughts on what the travel ball, the AAU ball has become, the culture around that, the shoes, the gear, etc. We've asked this question a lot, but the evolution of all that. What are your thoughts on some of that?
Yeah, it's fairly complex. I think there are some cases where you can actually see the positives: traveling, exposure. There are a number of really well-run programs that are attempting to teach kids how to play, how to conduct themselves, giving them opportunities to be seen. I don't think you can necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater when you look at some of the negative aspects of it. There's that sense of entitlement that is permeated through the AAU landscape, again, in terms of teams bouncing back and forth. And you even see it at the high school level sometimes. If things aren't quite the way they desire, then there's always somebody else that's willing to step in and make it easier or better or more appealing. But I think by and large, AAU is positive. But I do think there's an element that creates a sense of quick fix, instant gratification, maybe not valuing the process that's required to develop. And it can tend to put stardom and visibility in front of development. And when that happens, that's where my gears get grinded, because it should always be about developing kids so they can be their very best going forward, not necessarily what kind of show they might be able to put on, or who they're playing with, or what shoe brand they're affiliated with. Those things tend to me to get the cart before the horse in terms of development, and that's where I have a struggle with it. But again, I know there's some really outstanding programs out there that do it from the standpoint of development and helping kids realize dreams and opportunities that basketball can afford them. So I applaud all that.
Absolutely. And you're right. It's that constant battle between the world, what the world wants us to have and
value,
versus those virtues that are really important.
Yeah, and there's such a tendency with kids, Ted, to compare themselves to others. And I know that's normal based on your age. It's even difficult for us as adults sometimes to not look over here at this coach or look at this broadcaster. What is he or she making? Following do they have? I mean, those things are normal, but at some point you have to get comfortable in your own skin and journey, and that's maturity. And sometimes we do kids a disservice by not, and it's not just us, it's sometimes their parents and upbringing, and certainly society will cater to whatever their whims and wants are, regardless of how it impacts development and character. So that's even more reason for a nation of coaches to be doing what it's doing, and for these coaches to be seeking guidance and wisdom and how to lead and coach well in our climate.
That's right. We appreciate the plug there too. Hey, last question, and then we'll just wrap it up with any last remarks. But and this is really good. It gets back to you, the individual, your intentionality. Here's one from a coach, and I can recall this too, but years ago you spoke quite a bit on accountability and personal accountability. And are you still a part of an accountability group? And if so, what does that look like in your life?
Yeah, I am. I'm involved with a couple of Bible studies and small groups where I'm connected to dear brothers who are seeking to grow in the Lord and have influence in their 20 square feet is one of the ways we phrase it as a mantra for our Bible study group. But yeah, I think that's critically important. Ted, it was one of the real gifts and blessings I got early in faith, was to have some men come into my life, pastors and Bible study leaders, to impress upon me the importance of being grounded in learning and reading and memorizing the word, and also being connected to other brothers and sisters in a Christian community for mutual edification and growth. And so I can't recall many times when I've not been part of some type of group in addition to my church. And then I have dear friends that are journeying life with me, that I'm journeying life with, that I can call and seek prayer for challenges I'm facing and pray for them and engage with every aspect of their lives. And we need each other. We need each other. And it's easy in our day and age to kind of isolate ourselves, but we need to be intentional about surrendering ourselves to others, giving them permission to be close to us and to know us in 360 degrees inside and out. And we have to be engaged in that. We have to participate in that, and make that, and be part of making that happen.
That's really good. That right there reminds me of a friend of mine, an author too, and I'll drop this out for the coaches as well, but Mr. Stephen Mansfield, author, historian, leadership, guy, guru. But he's got a tiny little book. It's just a small one called Building Your Band of Brothers. And I love it. I handed it out to coaches, and many of his books are kind of like your Eulogy of Virtues book. Stories going back in history of people who led with great honor and those kind of things, of faith and values. But he's another one. But in those books, he talks about, especially as men in this country today, we've got to have other men speaking into our lives. We've got to have accountability. We got to have brothers around us
Yeah.
that know you inside out. And
Yeah.
coaches, you know this, coaches, the CEOs, the pastors that have high levels of expectation and responsibility. We all want to retreat onto that island. And man, it's tough to trust. It's tough to, it's tough to do anything. But man, I really appreciate you sharing that about having people in your life that can speak into your life, but also call you out when you
That's right. That's
but
right.
they're also there at 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
When something's wrong at your house and you're on the road, you can call that guy and he can go over and take care of your wife and your kids. And
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I would
Amen.
encourage coaches to get that group, find those guys that you can have in your life. Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to close down, but any last remarks or comments for the coaches out there listening?
You know what? Just appreciate what your responsibility is as leaders of young men and women and programs, and appreciate you stepping on and stepping up to grow and to learn so that you can be the best you can be for those that have been entrusted to your care. And I have great admiration and respect and appreciation for coaches, because it's a challenging responsibility, but much needed, and the impact and influence you can have is significant. And you might not always see it right away, but I know the coaches that have impacted me have heard about it from me, and there's a great sense of gratitude and indebtedness to them. And so keep on keeping on, and keep doing the work that you're doing for the sake of impacting others and helping them be better.
That's great. Well, we have a great level of gratitude to you for joining us today. We're thankful for you coaches that could join us and chat, as well as provide questions for Clark here as well. We're thrilled. We've just been absolutely humbled and blessed by our first two guests this week. Please plan to join us next week, next Wednesday, 2:00 Central, 3:00 Eastern. And you know the rest of it, wherever you're living, wherever you're at out there. We'll also I can't get that one right today. Stream live on YouTube, and you can see these as well, archived on our YouTube channel at Nations of Coaches. But again, a special thanks to Clark Kellogg, our guest, and coaches. We'll see you next week.